What's up, fight freaks, and welcome back. It's the Combat Remix and the favorite villain of MMA, bringing the MMA fix to diehard fans. Not someone who thinks that a rear naked choke is done in the nude. Today we got a popular requested super fight, and it's Anderson the Spider Silva versus Jon Bones Jones. This super fight is a prime versus prime bout. Now let's get to it. Former UFC middleweight champion Anderson the Spider Silva was the fifth man to hold the middleweight title. Silva became champion by defeating Cincinnati demigod Rich Franklin. And that's always slightly hyperbolic because I'm surprised Cincinnati doesn't have a statue of him. He would defeat Franklin not once, but twice, both times winning by KO. Silva would hold the title for nearly 7 years before being defeated by Chris Weidman at UFC 162, giving Silva 10 consecutive title defenses, which is the second most in UFC history.
I have a problem with that silver medal. You win the bronze, you think, well, at least I got something. But you win that silver, that's like, congratulations, you almost won.
Though if you ask me, they really need to change that so it's tied for first. If you remember, Anderson Silva's first title defense at UFC 67 was slated to be against Travis Lutter. However, the fight was changed to a non-title bout after Lutter failed to make weight. As we know, certain modifications have been made for situations like these. So had this fight taken place in the last several years, a win for Silva would still have counted as a successful title defense. So yeah, in my opinion, Silva should be the dual record holder, and I know many people who agree.
I would have won.
I know you would have won.
A superb Muay Thai striker and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, Silva either held or still holds a number of UFC records. These include most consecutive wins, most finishes in title bouts, most knockouts in title bouts, most knockdowns in title bouts, most knockdowns in a single title bout, highest striking accuracy percentage, highest significant striking percentage, both the fastest and latest submission in any middleweight title bout, most knockout of the night awards, most middleweight title defenses, most overall title defenses, and most consecutive days as champion, which, fun fact, is actually more than Demetrius Johnson.
No! God, please, no! 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 No!
Silva beat all the best middleweights of his day, a variety of fighters and a variety of different fighting styles, and on several occasions taking bouts at light heavyweight, defeating each of his opponents all the same, including former light heavyweight champion Forrest Griffin. And you can make the argument that that was his best performance in his entire career. After losing his belt to Chris Weidman, Anderson Silva would lose 6 of his next 8 bouts, getting finished in half of the bouts. And of his wins, one of them was a highly controversial decision win over Derek Brunson, and the other being a unanimous decision win over Nick Diaz, which unfortunately was later overturned to a no contest when it was discovered that Silva had failed his drug test. Which of course led to speculation about additional drug use throughout his career. Most would probably agree that this has significantly hindered Silva's legacy, as well as his placement amongst the greatest fighters of all time. But nonetheless, Anderson Silva was an absolute monster in his prime, and was undefeated in the UFC until he was pushing nearly 40 years old.
Not bad for an old man.
Considering the way in which he dominated his opponents with such precision, there are those who would still say that Anderson Silva is the MMA GOAT. Though many would say the same for his opponent. With only 6 professional MMA bouts to his name, Jonathan Dwight Jones made his UFC debut at UFC 87, defeating the likes of Andrei Gusmao.
Who?
That's not important right now. It took Jones only 7 fights in the UFC to get a title shot, defeating opponents such as Stephan Bonner, Brandon Vera, and Ryan Bader.
Is Wayne Brady going to have to choke a bitch?
And keep in mind, I said 7 fights and not 7 victories because ironically enough, Matt Hamill, the fighter he probably dominated the most, has a technical win over him. After Jones absolutely pummeled Hamill with a barrage of elbows, referee Steve Mazzagatti deemed that the last 2 strikes were illegal 12-6 downward elbows. Matt Hamill was unable to continue and Jon Jones was disqualified, thus giving Hamill the technical victory.
He's already dead.
There were certainly mixed feelings about the situation, but because of the amount of damage delivered by Jon Jones before the illegal blows, referee Mazzagatti's decision to disqualify Jones definitely came with some criticism.
Who gives a f*** what you think?
The DQ loss didn't slow Jones down at all. He finished his next 3 opponents and then challenged for the light heavyweight belt against Shogun, a fight where he was actually the betting favorite as the challenger. And rightfully so, as Shogun would have very few moments of success, and Jones would get the 3rd round TKO victory, and would become the youngest champion in UFC history. After winning the title, Jon Jones would go undefeated in 14 bouts, defeating the likes of Quentin Rampage Jackson, Rashad Evans, Lyoto Machida, Vitor Belfort, Alexander Gustafsson twice, Glover Teixeira, Daniel Cormier twice, Ovin St. Peru, Anthony Smith, Thiago Santos, and Dominic Reyes. adding his victory winning the belt and the 3 prior, and that brings Jon Jones' unbeaten streak to 18, which is the most in the UFC.
I'm confused. I'm confused right now, G.
While this may appear to contradict some other UFC records I've stated, let's clarify. It was inevitable that we got here, but I've gone as far as I can go without bringing up anything negative in Jon Jones' career. So the first thing we need to clarify is there is a difference between the longest win streak and the longest unbeaten streak. Jones' second victory over Daniel Cormier via knockout was overturned to a no contest when it was later discovered that he failed his drug test, specifically the steroid Turinabol. And we all know a no contest isn't a win, but it's also not a loss. So with that no contest on his record, his greatest win streak was 13, which is why you won't see his name on that UFC record. And while this may be the first time he was stripped of his title due to failed drug tests, he was actually stripped of his title in his first fight with Daniel Cormier, but that was due to Jones' felony hit and run, which resulted in his arrest, as well as a pregnant woman breaking her arm.
You are a terrible person. A terrible, terrible person that should be put in jail.
These actions were a violation of the UFC's Athletic Code of Conduct policy, and thus, Jones was stripped of the title. And unfortunately, these aren't the only 2 times Jones was stripped of a title. In fact, between his 2 bouts with Daniel Cormier, Jon Jones would defeat Ovince St. Preux for the interim light heavyweight belt, but was subsequently stripped of the interim belt when he tested positive for both clomiphene and letrozole. So with all this controversy regarding steroids and other potential performance enhancement drugs, just like Anderson Silva, this has clearly affected his legacy as well as his standing amongst the greatest fighters of all time. In fact, Jones' situation is probably more egregious than Silva's, considering his actions outside the UFC resulting in multiple arrests. Many people, in fact I would even say a majority of people, probably consider Jon Jones the greatest fighter of all time, citing that had Jones not been stripped and certain wins not been overturned, he would have definitely broken some of the aforementioned UFC records. And just like Anderson Silva's controversial win over Derek Brunson, it seems only fair to point out Jon Jones has his fair share of controversial wins. The most notorious 3 being his first fight over Alexander Gustafsson and his 2 most recent fights over Thiago Santos and Dominic Reyes. And while the first 2 were close, I find his win over Reyes to be particularly egregious. But who cares what I think?
Who gives a what you think?
Yeah, that's pretty much what I said. But at the time of this recording, Jon Jones has voluntarily vacated his light heavyweight championship belt, and more than likely will be competing for the heavyweight title. We'll see how he does and whether or not he comes back to light heavyweight. But the real question we want to focus on is, does a prime Jon Jones beat a prime Anderson Silva? Both fighters have a fairly long reach, but it's actually Jones who will enjoy about a 7 or 8 inch reach advantage in this fight. Which is rather interesting to see how this will play out, considering that most likely Anderson Silva does have the advantage in the speed, technical striking, and striking defense. But Jones may be the most creative striker that Silva has ever faced. And say what you will about Jones, but he has unbelievably good fight IQ. And this may be a low blow to bring up, but I got a feeling the eye pokes are probably going to play a factor too. Jones has always been widely criticized for his use of eye pokes and has rarely penalized the point for ever using them. But the biggest factor for me has got to be the wrestling. Even in fights that Silva has won, he has been vulnerable when he's able to be taken down to the ground. This would include his fights with Travis Lutter, Nate Marquardt, Dan Henderson, Chael Sonnen, Chris Weidman, and Daniel Cormier, and this would even include his fights just before he got into the UFC, like in his bouts with Jeremy Horn and Deju Chikasi. And even if you were to make the argument that Jon Jones isn't a better wrestler than every single one of those fighters, he's certainly up there. And I would argue that even if he's not the best technical wrestler, his size and stature certainly make it more difficult than some of the other fighters he's faced. Plus, even if he's not a better technical striker than Anderson Silva, he was able to beat a number of dangerous strikers, such as Vitor Belfort, Lyoto Machida, Shogun Rua, Alexander Gustafsson, Thiago Santos, and Dominic Reyes. So while Silva may be the quicker, more technical striker, I'd have to say that Jon Jones is skilled enough on the feet to hang with him, at least hold his own, and he's miles ahead of him in the wrestling department. If he really wanted to, I think Jones could hold Silva on his back without too much fear of being submitted. Definitely not saying that Silva couldn't catch him off his back or even knock him out on the feet, but if these two fight 20 times, I'd say Jon Jones wins a healthy majority. I'm going with Jon Jones for the win.
I beat you after a weekend of cocaine.
Hope you enjoyed the super fight matchup, guys. Please let me know any other super fights you'd like to see in the comments below. I always appreciate my fight freaks, and everybody else, please like and subscribe right now before I send a Jehovah's Witness to your house. Remix is signing out, always bringing your MMA fix.
Gay!
There's a good shot to the body.
My legs!
Oh no! You heard him say
my legs!
It is all over!
I am Jon Jones.
And that was something.
It was at this moment that he knew. He f***ed up.
Early turning point. That is an early turning point in this fight.
Pantomime blows with an